I am going to be honest about something before I start, and I want that noted. I am not doing this because I want to. I am doing it because I was told this is how it works now. You file the report with operations, and then you sit here and you say it again into this, so someone else can hear it later if they need to. That is what I was told. My name is Paul, of course. I am a Level 2 electrical maintenance technician with Hargrove Energy Services. We're a subcontractor. We get dispatched to remote stations when the client's in-house team is short-staffed or when the site needs a specific certification for inspection compliance. I've been doing this for 11 years. Mostly hydro relay stations, some wind farms, a few transformer substations out in the corridor between Chapleau and White River in northern Ontario. I am used to remote work. I am used to being alone. The station in question is Enerco Relay Point 43. I am going to call it RP-43 because that is what it said on the dispatch sheet, and that is what was printed on the access badge they gave me. It is a hydro relay station about 90 kilometers north of Hearst, Ontario, on a gravel access road that splits off Highway 583. There is nothing around it. I don't mean there is not much around it. I mean there is nothing. The tree line comes right up to the fence on 3 sides, and the 4th side faces a gravel lot big enough for maybe 4 vehicles. And beyond that is muskeg for as far as you'd ever want to look. There is no cell reception. There is a landline in the control room that routes through the station's internal phone system. There is a 2-way radio, which I was told had limited range and should only be used for emergencies. I was dispatched for a 72-hour maintenance window. Arrive Monday morning, complete the scheduled diagnostics and relay calibrations, and leave by Thursday morning. I was told the station was lightly staffed. I was told I would overlap with one on-site operator during the day and be alone during the night shift, which would run from 2200 to 0600. This was not unusual. Many of these stations are designed to run unattended overnight. The operator handles the day monitoring, the contractor handles the maintenance tasks, and the night is just a presence requirement. Someone has to be on site in case an alarm triggers. That is it. You sit in the control room. You watch the panels. You drink coffee. You wait. I arrived Monday just after 10 in the morning. The access road was worse than I expected. About 40 minutes of slow gravel driving through dense spruce and jack pine. No markers, no signage until the last 2 kilometers, where I started seeing small metal posts with reflective numbering. The station itself was a standard relay layout. A central control building, which was a single-story steel frame structure with a flat roof, maybe 30 meters by 15. Connected to that was a fenced transformer yard with 4 main units and a bank of capacitors. Behind the control building, there was a secondary structure I initially assumed was a storage shed or generator housing. It was lower to the ground, partially set into the earth, with a heavy steel door and no windows. I'll come back to that. The on-site operator was a man named Dennis. I am not going to give his last name because I don't think that is fair to him. Dennis was maybe 55, 60 thin, quiet. He had the look of a man who had been at remote postings for a long time, and I don't mean that in a romantic way. He looked like someone who had stopped expecting conversation. He met me in the lot, showed me where to park, handed me a clipboard with the station orientation sheet, and walked me through the control building. He was professional, efficient, not unfriendly, but not warm. He showed me the relay cabinets, the monitoring desk, the SCADA interface, the phone, the radio, the washroom, the small kitchen area, with a microwave and a coffee maker that looked like it had been there since the 80s. He showed me the bunk room, which was just off the main hallway and had 2 cots, a space heater, and a curtain instead of a door. Then he gave me the schedule, and this is where I need to be precise, because this is where it started, even though I didn't know it at the time. The schedule was printed on a laminated card. One side had the daily maintenance checklist, which was normal. The other side had the night protocol. It was labeled RP-43, overnight operational parameters. It listed the following, and I am going to try to recall the exact phrasing. From 2200 to 0600, the on-site technician is to remain in the main control room unless conducting an emergency response to an active alarm. All exterior doors are to be locked from the inside by 2300. The rear access corridor, which connected the control building to the secondary structure, was marked as a restricted zone between midnight and 0500. The laminated card said, and I remember this clearly, Rear corridor and substation annex are under automated access restriction from 0 o'clock to 5 o'clock. Do not attempt manual override. Do not investigate auditory or visual anomalies originating from restricted zones. Report any anomalies in the morning debrief log. I read that standing in the kitchen while Dennis poured himself a coffee. I looked at him. I asked him what automated access restriction meant. He said the locks on the rear corridor door and the exterior door to the secondary structure were on a timed system. They locked at midnight and unlocked at 5. I asked him why. He said it was a security protocol. I asked him what was in the secondary structure. He said it was a substation annex, equipment storage, backup transformer components, some older monitoring equipment that was no longer in active use. I asked him what auditory or visual anomalies meant. He took a sip of his coffee, and he said very evenly, "The building settles at night. The transformer yard hums. Sometimes you hear things that sound like they're coming from inside the building, but they're just resonance patterns from the equipment outside. The protocol is there so people don't go chasing sounds at 2 in the morning and trip over something in the dark." That was a reasonable answer. I accepted it. I had worked at stations where the hum of high-voltage equipment could vibrate through the walls and create sounds that felt almost vocal. Transformer hum, especially from older units, can produce low-frequency resonance that plays tricks on your ears. I nodded. I put the card in my shirt pocket. I went to work. Monday was uneventful. I spent the day running diagnostics on the relay cabinets, testing breaker response times, checking insulation resistance on the main bus connections. Dennis stayed in the control room, monitoring the SCADA screens, occasionally stepping outside to do a visual inspection of the transformer yard. We ate lunch separately. He had a sandwich from a cooler. I heated up a can of soup. We exchanged maybe 50 words total over the course of the afternoon. Around 6 in the evening, Dennis said he was done for the day. He told me the day shift operator slot would be unmanned on Tuesday because his rotation had him off-site, but he'd be back Wednesday. He said if I needed anything, the landline could reach the regional dispatch office during business hours. Then he left. I heard his truck start in the lot, and then the sound of gravel, and then nothing. Just the hum. That is a specific kind of silence, the silence of a remote station at night. It is not real silence. There is always the transformer hum, this deep, constant, 60 Hz presence that lives in the walls and the floor and your chest. And under that, there is the sound of the building itself, the ventilation system cycling, the click of relay switching, the occasional pop of metal expanding or contracting as the temperature changes. It is not quiet, but it is empty. There are no human sounds, no voices, no footsteps, no cars, just systems running. It sounds like being inside a machine that is breathing. I made coffee. I sat at the monitoring desk. I watched the SCADA screens. Everything was nominal. I read for a while. I had brought a paperback with me, a John le Carré novel I'd been working through. Around 10, I did a walkthrough of the building, checking that the exterior doors were secure, making sure the heating system was set right. The temperature outside was already dropping. This was late October, and that far north, you can get down to -10 overnight without anyone commenting on it. I locked the exterior doors by 2300, as the protocol said. I checked the rear corridor, the door at the end of the main hallway, which led to the short corridor connecting to the secondary structure, was a heavy steel fire door with an electronic lock. It had a small status light, green during the day. I noticed that at some point in the evening, I couldn't tell exactly when, it had turned red. It was locked. I tested the handle, gently, just to confirm. It didn't move. I went back to the control room. Nothing happened that first night. I want to be clear about that. I sat in the control room until 6 in the morning. I drank coffee. I dozed a little in the chair. The transformer hum was constant. At 0500, I walked back to the rear corridor door, and the light was green. I opened it. The corridor was short, maybe 10 meters, with concrete walls and a single fluorescent tube overhead that flickered when I turned it on. At the end of the corridor was another steel door, this one leading to the secondary structure. I didn't open it. I didn't have a reason to. My work was in the main relay cabinets. I closed the corridor and went back. Tuesday. I was alone all day. Danis was off-site. I worked through the maintenance checklist. I ran the calibration sequences on the relays. I checked the battery backup systems. I inspected the transformer yard in the afternoon. walking the perimeter of the fenced area, checking for oil leaks, listening to the units. They were old. 3 of the 4 were vintage 70s units, big, heavy, steel, cased things that hummed with a deep, almost organic vibration. The 4th was newer, maybe early 2000s, and it ran quieter. I noticed that the fencing around the yard extended further than I'd initially thought. It wrapped around the back of the control building and enclosed the secondary structure as well. The fence around the secondary structure was taller. It had razor wire on top. The gate was padlocked. I didn't have a key for it. I noticed something else that afternoon. There were ground-level vents along the base of the secondary structure. Small rectangular vents, maybe 30 centimeters by 10, with heavy mesh covers. I counted 6 of them on the side I could see. That seemed like a lot of ventilation for a storage shed, and the vents weren't passive. When I crouched near one, I could feel air being pulled in. There was an active intake system running. Something inside that structure needed airflow. I told myself it was probably a battery room. Large-scale battery banks generate heat and off-gas hydrogen, and they need constant ventilation. That was the most logical explanation. I went back inside. Tuesday night, I followed the same protocol, locked the exterior doors by 2300. Checked the rear corridor door. Red light, locked. Saturday in the control room, drank coffee, read my book, and for the first couple of hours nothing happened. Then, at approximately 01:30, I heard something. It came from the direction of the rear corridor. It was faint. It could have been mechanical. That is what I told myself, and I want to be fair to what I actually thought in the moment, not what I think now. In the moment, I thought it sounded like a low, rhythmic thumping. Not loud, not aggressive, just a steady, slow pulse. Like something mechanical cycling, like a pump, maybe, or a compressor kicking in and out. It lasted about 10 minutes, and then it stopped. I noted it in the log I wrote, 132, low rhythmic sound from rear corridor direction. Likely mechanical. Duration approx 10 minutes. That is what the protocol said to do. Report anomalies in the morning debrief log. About 40 minutes later it started again. Same sound, same rhythm, but this time there was something else under it. A lower sound, almost below the threshold of hearing, more felt than heard. It made the surface of my coffee vibrate, very slightly. Just enough that I could see the faintest concentric ripples when I looked at the mug under the fluorescent light. I put my hand flat on the desk, and I could feel it there too, a vibration in the structure of the building itself. This lasted longer, maybe 25 minutes, then it stopped, and the building went back to its normal ambient hum, and I sat there feeling like something had just finished doing something it needed to do. At 0500, the rear corridor door light turned green. I opened the door. The corridor looked the same, fluorescent light flickering. Concrete walls. I walked to the end and stood in front of the second door, the one leading into the secondary structure. I put my hand on it. The steel was warm, not hot, just noticeably warmer than the ambient temperature of the corridor, which was cold. That structure, whatever it was generating heat. I went back to the control room. I wrote my log entry. I made breakfast. I waited for Denis. He arrived around 9. I told him about the sounds. I told him about the vibration. I told him about the warmth on the door. He listened. He didn't interrupt. When I was done, he nodded and said, "That is the equipment in the annex. It cycles on and off overnight. Automated process. Nothing to worry about." I asked him what equipment specifically. He said backup conditioning systems for the transformer oil. I asked him why it only ran at night. He said it was scheduled to run during off-peak hours to reduce load on the grid. I asked him why the door was warm. He said the conditioning process generates heat. These were all plausible answers. Each one, individually, made sense. But together, they felt rehearsed. Not in the way that a lie feels rehearsed, in the way that answers feel when someone has given them before. Many times, to different people who all asked the same questions. I let it go. I worked through Wednesday. Dennis and I completed the final round of relay inspections. Everything was in order. My dispatch was supposed to end Thursday morning, and I was supposed to drive out after sunrise. Wednesday night was my last overnight shift. I need to slow down here because this is the part that matters. Wednesday night followed the same pattern at first. Dennis left around 6. I ate dinner. I made coffee. I locked the exterior doors. I sat in the control room. The rear corridor door light turned red sometime before midnight. I checked it at 23:50 and it was already locked. At around 01:15, the sound started again. The rhythmic thumping, the subaudible vibration. But this time they were louder. Not dramatically louder, but enough that I could hear the thumping clearly from the control room without straining. And the vibration was strong enough that the pen on my clipboard rolled slightly, ticking against the metal clip with each pulse. I sat there. I followed protocol. I did not go to the rear corridor. I wrote my log entry. And then, at approximately 0200, something changed. The SCADA system registered a fault. Panel 4, which monitored the auxiliary systems, showed a communication dropout with something labeled ANXL2. I had never seen that designation before. It wasn't on any of the relay diagrams I'd been working with. It wasn't in the maintenance documentation. I didn't know what it was connected to. The fault cleared itself after about 90 seconds, and the panel returned to normal. 10 minutes later, it faulted again. Same designation, ANXL2. This time, when the fault registered, the lights in the control room dimmed, not flickered. Dimmed, they dropped in intensity for maybe 3 seconds, then came back to full. The transformer hum outside changed pitch, just barely, and then settled back. I was awake now, fully awake. The fatigue I'd been carrying all week was gone. I was sitting upright in the chair, and my hands were on the desk, and I was listening. Not just hearing, listening. There is a difference. The thumping from the rear corridor had stopped. The vibration had stopped. The building was quiet in a way that felt new, not the normal quiet of systems running. A different quiet, the quiet of something waiting. At 0222, the landline rang. I need to explain something about the phone system. The landline in the control room was connected to the station's internal system, which had 3 extensions. One in the control room, one in the bunk room, and one, according to the orientation sheet, in the substation annex. The phone had a small display that showed which extension was calling. When I picked it up, the display said EXT3. Extension 3 was the annex. I picked up the phone. I said, "Control room, La Course." There was an open line. I could hear ambient sound, a low electrical hum, different from the transformer hum. Denser, more layered. Under that, there was something that sounded like air moving through a space, the kind of sound you hear in a large room with active ventilation. And under that, at the very edge of what I could make out, there was a pattern. Something almost like breathing, but too regular. Too even mechanical, maybe, or regulated. Like something breathing on a timer, I said, "Hello? Is someone there?" The breathing pattern changed. It hitched. Just once. Like whatever I was hearing had responded to my voice, not with words, just with a change in its rhythm. And then it resumed exactly as before. Steady, even measured. I hung up. I sat at the desk for a long time. I don't know exactly how long. The clock on the SCADA system said it was 02:40 when I looked again. I had been sitting there for almost 20 minutes without moving. I want to describe what I was feeling because I think it is important. I was not panicked. I was not terrified in the way you see in movies, where someone screams or runs. I was experiencing something more like a very deep, very cold clarity. The kind of mental state where every small detail becomes extremely sharp, and you feel like your body is making decisions before your mind catches up. My hands were steady. My breathing was controlled. But somewhere in my chest, in a place I can't quite describe, there was a weight. Like a stone had been placed there. And the stone knew something that I didn't yet. At 02:51, the phone rang again. Extension 3. I did not pick it up. I let it ring. It rang 7 times. Then it stopped. At 03:05, the SCADA system registered a new alert. Not a fault this time. A status change. Panel 4 showed that something labeled ANXENV had changed from nominal to active cycle. I didn't know what that meant. I had no documentation for it. But below the status change, a line of text appeared on the monitor that I had never seen before on any SCADA system at any station I had ever worked at. It said, "Personnel, remain in designated area." That was not a standard SCADA message. SCADA systems display equipment statuses, alarm codes, fault descriptions. They don't give instructions to personnel. That text was something that had been programmed into this specific system, for this specific situation, by someone who anticipated that a person sitting in this control room at this hour would need to be told to stay where they were. The lights dimmed again. Longer this time. 5 seconds, maybe 6. And during those seconds, I heard something from the rear corridor that I have not been able to explain, and that I will try to describe as accurately as I can. It was a sound like metal under stress. A deep, slow groan, the kind of sound a ship makes when the hull flexes. It came from the direction of the annex, through the rear corridor, through the closed and locked fire door, and into the main hallway of the control building. And embedded in that sound, woven into it the way a thread is woven into fabric, was something that sounded like a voice. Not words, not language, a tonal quality that was voice-like. That had the resonance and the cadence of a human vocal cord-producing sound, but stretched, slowed down, pulled across a longer span of time than a human voice should occupy. It lasted maybe 8 seconds. Then the lights came back to full, and the sound stopped, and the SCADA panel returned to nominal across the board. I did not leave the control room. I did not open the rear corridor door. I sat in the chair with my hands flat on the desk, and I breathed, and I waited. I followed protocol. And here is the thing I keep coming back to, the thing that disturbs me more than the sounds. The protocol was right. Whoever wrote that laminated card, whoever designed the night procedures for RP-43, they knew what would happen. They knew the sounds would come. They knew the phone would ring. They knew someone would be sitting in this chair, hearing these things, and they wrote a protocol for it. Not to prevent it, not to investigate it, to manage the person who had to be there while it happened. The rest of the night was quiet. The sounds did not return. The phone did not ring again. The SCADA system showed nothing unusual. At 0500, the rear corridor door light turned green. I did not open it. I stayed in the control room until 0600. I packed my tools. I loaded my truck. I wrote my final log entry. Dennis arrived at 9. I was still there. I had not left. I was sitting in the lot, in my truck, with the engine running and the heater on, because the control building had started to feel like something I did not want to be inside anymore. He walked over. He looked at me through the window. I think he knew. I think he could see it. He asked me if I was all right, and the way he asked it was not the way you ask someone if they're all right when you expect them to say yes. It was the way you ask it when you already know the answer, and you are giving them a chance to say it out loud. I told him what happened. All of it. The sounds. The SCADA faults. The phone calls from extension 3. The message on the screen. A voice in the metal. He listened. When I was done, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that I have replayed in my mind every day since. He said, "It is not in the annex. The annex is where they built the interface. What is on the other side of the interface isn't in any building." I asked him what he meant. He shook his head. He said, "You followed protocol. That is the only thing that matters. You did the right thing." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to me. It was a phone number and an email address with a header that said, "Incident Debrief Confidential." He told me to contact that number when I got home. He said they would walk me through the reporting process. He said it was important that I report because they keep a record. I asked him who they were. He said, "The people who manage what happens here at night. They're not Inerco. They're not Hargrove. They've been managing it longer than either company has existed." I asked him how long he'd been working at RP-43. He said 11 years. I asked him if it happened every night. He said no. He said it was cyclical. He said sometimes months would go by with nothing, and then it would start again, and it would run for a few weeks, and then it would stop. He said they had learned that it was worse when someone new was on site. He said that was why the overnight protocol existed. He said the presence requirement wasn't about alarm response. It was a condition. Something about having a person in the building during the cycle was part of how it worked. I asked him what it was. He said he didn't know. He said nobody he'd spoken to knew. He said the interface in the annex had been there when the station was built in 1973. He said the station was built around it, not the other way around. I drove back to Hearst. It took me almost 2 hours on the gravel road and another hour on the highway. I didn't stop. I didn't turn on the radio. I just drove. When I got to my motel room, I sat on the bed for a long time, and then I called the number on the paper. A woman answered. She didn't give her name. She asked for my name, my dispatch number, and the station designation. I gave her all three. She asked me to describe the events of the previous night. I did. She typed while I spoke. I could hear the keyboard when I was done. She asked me a series of questions. Had I opened the rear corridor door after midnight? Had I approached the annex exterior door? Had I answered the second phone call? Had I attempted to interact with the SCADA message? I said no to all of them. She said, "Good, your compliance is noted." Then, she asked me if I was experiencing any persistent auditory phenomena, ringing, humming, or a sense of low-frequency vibration. I said I wasn't sure. She said to monitor it. She said if it persisted beyond 72 hours, to call the number again, and they would arrange a follow-up. I asked her what was in the annex. She said the annex housed monitoring equipment for a subsurface phenomenon that the station was built to observe. I asked her what kind of phenomenon. She paused. Then she said, "The station's classification is above my authorization level. What I can tell you is that your experience is consistent with previous reports, and your compliance with overnight protocol significantly reduced your risk profile." I asked her what would have happened if I'd opened the corridor door. She said, "That is addressed in the full protocol document, which you are not cleared to access. I can tell you that non-compliant incidents have occurred in the past, and the outcomes are described in records that I have read, and I would strongly encourage you to continue your compliance." Her voice did not change when she said this. It was the same even professional tone, but there was something in the precision of her words. The phrase, "outcomes are described in records that I have read." She said it like someone who had read something that had changed the way she thought about what a bad outcome could look like. She gave me an incident reference number. She told me that Hargrove would not dispatch me to RP-43 again unless I specifically requested it. She said most contractors who completed an active cycle shift chose not to return. She asked me if I had any other questions. I had 100 questions. I asked none of them. I said no. She said the debrief was complete. That was 6 weeks ago. I have not been back to RP-43. I have not spoken to Dennis again. I tried calling the number once more, about 2 weeks after the incident, because the vibration had not gone away. It was faint. Most of the time I couldn't feel it. But in quiet moments, late at night, when the furnace cycled off and the house was still, I could feel it in my chest. The same low pulse, the same rhythm, as if whatever I had been near was still near me, or as if some part of me was still near it. When I called the number, a different person answered. A man this time. He took my incident reference number and said the vibration was within expected parameters for post-exposure personnel. He said it typically attenuated over 8 to 12 weeks. He said in rare cases it persisted longer, and if it did, they had a protocol for that too. He said it as though having a protocol for that was supposed to be comforting. It was not. I asked him how many people had called that number, how many incident reports were on file. He said he wasn't authorized to share that information. Then, after a moment, he said, "You are not alone in this experience, Mr. LaCourse. This has been documented for a long time, at this station and at others." Others, he said others. I didn't ask how many. I didn't want a number. A number would make it more real in a way I wasn't ready for. I am going to say one more thing, and then I am done. The night I got home from Hearst, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed in my apartment in Timmins, and I stared at the ceiling, and I listened to the building, my apartment building, the one I've lived in for 6 years. And for the first time, I noticed sounds I had never noticed before. The hum of the electrical panel in the basement, transmitted through the structure, the cycling of the ventilation system, the clicks and ticks of systems running in the walls around me, above me, below me. We live inside machines, all of us. Every building is a system, and every system has processes that run when we're not watching, and we never ask what they're doing because we trust that someone somewhere has it under control. I don't trust that anymore. What I heard at RP-43 was not a malfunction. It was not an anomaly. It was an operation. It was scheduled. It was managed. It had protocols and personnel and an incident archive. Someone built an interface in a concrete annex in the middle of the Northern Ontario bush, and they built a relay station around it to hide it, and every night between midnight and 5, something connects through that interface, and the only rule is that you stay in your chair and you don't open the door. I followed the rule. I am here. I am filing my report. I am doing what the protocol says to do, but I can still feel it right now, in my chest, that low hum steady patient. like it is waiting for the next cycle. I don't know what is on the other side of the interface. I don't think Dennis knows either. I think the people who answer that phone number might know, or they might just be managing something that was handed down to them by people who managed it before them, going back to 1973 or earlier, and maybe nobody knows anymore. Maybe the knowing isn't the point. Maybe the point is the protocol, the compliance, the keeping of the schedule. I keep thinking about what Denny said. It is not in the annex. The annex is where they built the interface. He said what is on the other side isn't in any building. I think about that at night, when the apartment goes quiet, and I can feel the hum, and I wonder how many buildings are sitting on top of something like this. How many stations and substations and relay points and utility buildings in the middle of nowhere are just the visible part of a system that goes deeper than anyone who works there understands. I don't have an answer. I have an incident reference number and a vibration in my chest, and a laminated card that I realized, when I unpacked my bag, was still in my shirt pocket. I should have left it at the station. I don't know why I kept it. I don't know why, sometimes late at night, I take it out and read it again. The words haven't changed. Do not attempt manual override. Do not investigate auditory or visual anomalies originating from restricted zones. Good advice. I followed it. I am still here. I'd like this debrief to be marked as complete.